The World Bank says global commodity prices are expected to fall sharply this year, the first time since the pandemic. In a statement released Wednesday, the World Bank, however, says food prices remain near record highs, compounding food insecurity. Joining us for a chat to this latest report is Mr. Bongo Adi. He's a professor of economics at the Lagos Business School. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. So, what do you make of the latest release by the World Bank regarding global commodity prices in 2023?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for having me this evening. I think that's quite expected. We've seen I won't say the worst is over, but I think there's been some kind of adjustment. 12 months, 14 months since the crisis in Ukraine, which is one of the triggering factors that drove commodity prices up, shooting above the roof. Not just, commodities across all variants, energy, food, other minerals, and all of that. But then there has been a process of adjustment whereby countries and firms have continued to find ways to abet the negative consequences, and then some have in economics, macroeconomics, talk about substitution effect and income effect. When prices go up, there's something that happens, which is a substitution effect that, consumers, even producers, begin to shift away from those commodities or things that have gone up in prices to cheaper ones. So I think the substitution effect is something that we've seen, so the global adjustment has happened. So alternatives have been found for some of these, the commodities, coming from Ukraine. And then countries have also had to embark on policies that help them to, overcome, that momentary shock. So yes, when you consider all of these adjustments, it's really we can agree with the World Bank that global commodity price index, their own index has really gone lower.
Well, what about in Nigeria? Food inflation has been climbing, 24.5% now, I think, as at March year on year, 2.07 month on month, also climbing as well. Do you see a fall in food inflation in Nigeria?
Yes, I can anticipate that because actually we still import a heavy amount of food. So when we talk about the food inflation, I think it's not just about the food that we produce at home, but it's also about the imported ones. So just last year, I think Nigeria spent about 1.9 trillion importing food. That's a 5% increase over the previous year, 2021. So we've seen an increase, consistent rise in food imports from 2017. So it's been going from 800 billion, 900 billion, 1.2 trillion in 2021, and then in 2022 we've gone to almost 2 trillion, naira worth of food imports. So if you consider that we import that huge amount of food, from abroad, then it means that when the price index gone down, when prices of food drop in the rest of the world, therefore what we have to spend importing food will also go down. So that means that the food inflation, especially the imported component of that, will definitely, ameliorate the inflation surge here in Nigeria. And again, last year also we have the menace of flooding, which destroyed much of the harvest and much of the farmland. But I pray that we don't have that this year. So, we have to trust that the meteorologists will, give us more information on that. But, bearing any of such, shocks, I don't expect that we will continue to see such high level of food inflation in this year. So yes, a global commodity price drop will definitely have a palliative effect on Nigeria's food inflation.
Yeah, but Professor, what about other factors? The last monetary policy meeting, Central Bank Governor Gordon Emefiele pointed to 3 factors that was driving up food inflation in Nigeria. He said 1, road transportation costs. And he said 2, insecurity in food producing areas. And then 3, legacy infrastructure issues. So if you're looking at the imports from overseas, what about those other factors? Do you think those will play a role in?
Well, those other factors have been there over the years. Insecurities, is the one I would say has worsened. But then we've seen that maybe because of the election this year, we've not had as much disturbance as we used to have. So, but I've noticed that with the elections out of the way, that we're beginning to record, increasing incidents of insecurity. So, if we continue to have that, of course, it will have effect. But what I'm trying to say is that those are like we hold those situations or conditions constant, because we still have the logistic problems, we have insecurity issues, we have weather conditions that been disturbing over the years. So I think the major cause of the food inflation that we've registered in 2022, much of it seems to have been imported, right? So I tend to go with the World Bank, and I think I stand by what I said, that we will see a drop in food inflation, especially being driven by the imported component. Those other factors that you said that the central bank governor mentioned are things I think we hold constant. They've always been there, over the years.
Professor, how much of an impact would a sustainable rail infrastructure reduce food prices in Nigeria? The NDDC, the Niger Delta.
Of course.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so, the issue here is that part of the reason for high inflation, not just food inflation, but high cost of doing business in Nigeria is always the infrastructure, deficiency that we've suffered over the years. And then the Buhari administration, recorded some strides in expanding our infrastructure asset, especially when it comes to transportation infrastructure. So, the rail, regardless whether it is the narrow gauge or the wide one or whatever, so seems to have, he gave it some sort of priority during his tenure, and we've seen expansion. But then that hasn't quite covered the arterial areas, especially where we have the food coming from. So definitely, if we prioritize investment in rail infrastructure, all over the world, if you want to reduce transportation costs, rail is the way to go. But unfortunately, over the years, we haven't quite given it the attention that it deserves. So I hope that the incoming administration will prioritize it, and find, because we already have the railway, national railway plan or something. So I just hope that they can escalate investment in that, find the capital to really unlock that potential. Because with that, definitely, once you solve the logistic problem, and not just food, but the economy will actually start to breathe a new lease of life.
All right, Professor, I want to ask you something else. You mentioned the incoming administration. The plan is to remove fuel subsidies. What do you think, considering that road is the major transport channel for food, what do you think that impact would have on food prices if it's removed?
Well, the mindset right now is the feeling is that once fuel subsidy is removed, then we're going to have high cost. I mean, the cost, which is market driven, sector will completely be disciplined by market forces. So meaning that whatever it is that we, marketers get the fuel at, in the international market, they will pass it straight down to consumers, final consumers. So that is one way of looking at it. But there's another way of looking at it, which is that we are going to unlock real competition, what we call a contestable market, in the sector. So once that happens, so we will begin to see some of these boutique refineries coming up. So once you have competition there, but I hope that it's not just a matter of removal of the fuel subsidy. We also have to ensure that the deregulation of the petroleum sector, upstream and downstream. So if we have full deregulation, because they have to work, hand in hand. So if we are able to achieve that, so that we have the market discipline, subjecting the entire industry to the discipline of the market, not just one side, then definitely you will have the benefit of competition, competitiveness, and what I said, contestable market. That will drive prices down. Okay, so consumers will have, choices to make. So that's what will happen. But then if we still go the way we are going about it, just to remove fuel subsidy, then and then we do not have a full deregulation of the other components that will have complemented this, then what will happen is that, yes, that cost will be passed on, but not as much as we think about it. So some people think that it will be in the neighborhood, okay, if Dangote refinery comes on stream, then we'll be looking at fuel pump price in the region of 290 naira per liter. But then if it doesn't, then we'll be looking at, close to between 300 and 500, thereabout. Again, so we have to, compare that to what, is obtainable in neighboring countries. Although the first, if you want to do this kind of analysis, you also have to put into consideration what's the minimum wage, the income level of people in Nigeria before you can make such comparisons, so that you are sure that you're comparing apple and apple and not apple and oranges. So I don't want to go into the details of that. But what I can say is that the benefit of a removal of this fuel subsidy is that the government doesn't have to find the money to pay the marketers. Currently, in this budget, we have about 3.6 trillion made available for fuel subsidy between January and June. Okay, so fuel subsidy has increased from 500 billion in 2015 to more than 3 trillion naira currently. So that's massive. Supposing that, what is our budget? Don't forget what the budget is. So government has enough money to really cushion the effect. That's why I really do not understand why they have to go borrow in additional $800 million, depending on the rates, which is between 390 to 500 and something billion naira. They say they want to use to cushion the effects of that on the vulnerable group in the country. I really do not understand how that works. So if you are removing the subsidy, okay, so that means that you have some resources that can be, freed up to help people in different areas. So it means that the run on the foreign exchange market will stop. So that will lead definitely to a reduction. I mean, the naira will appreciate a little bit. So that appreciation will definitely have a dampening effect on inflation, right? So yes, people may have, transportation may have to go up, increase in cost, or the inflation, may rise from that point. But then the other sectors that benefit from low exchange rates or more favorable exchange rate that will come as a result of the removal of the subsidy can really cushion the effect, so that it will not be all too unpalatable for the masses. So that is the way I want to look at it. So let's take a comprehensive, holistic view of the fuel subsidy impact, and not to look at it from just a very narrow perspective on the the transportation effect, which definitely impact food price. But there will be other ameliorating and dampening effect that will come from the exchange rate effect.
Excellent breakdown. Thank you so much. You actually preempted my next question. Currency depreciation. Okay, so do you see the currency depreciating further this year? And if that's the case, and we're still importing, won't that have an effect on food prices?
Well, we need to. Well, if you're still importing fuel, I mean, if subsidy goes, right, that's going to have that will be a salutary impact. Will have a salutary impact on the exchange rate. If, of course, we still have to import food, definitely. Okay, I said that food imports gobbled almost 2 trillion naira, and that has been growing over the years. Okay, so the average, pre-COVID years, between 2015 and 2019, average about 900 billion. But then after that, in 2021, it increased, 2022 increased further. So we are talking about 2 trillion worth of food imports. So if you go with that projection, this year will be more than 2 trillion or around that region, depending on how this dampening of inflation in the rest of the world works. So supposing that it is significant enough, so we may not spend as much as 1.9 trillion importing food in 2023. So if it is less, then that means that you will not have that kind of impact as you envisage. So yes, if we continue to import, well, that's not just the import. We have to look at our current account balances as well. So current account balance, not just the food import component of it. You have to look at the total import against our export. I think we are actually in the green of positive territory right now, because since our export is more than our import, so meaning that we have some kind of current account surplus, not deficit. So if we continue to enjoy such surplus, and if it continues to increase, that will continue to buoy up our external reserve. And as the external reserve buoys up, surely the currency will not depreciate, it will actually appreciate. And again, all these things depend on the kind of the signal that the coming government will send out to the rest of the world. So assuming that they send out the right signal by appointing the right people, who have the right competence and able to command the right brand and reputation, in the global community, I think that will resonate, and then that will inure positively for the country.
Great stuff, Professor. Thanks for breaking it out. About a minute to go. I just want to ask you about power. As far as the new direction that Nigeria's agricultural policy should take in order to achieve food sustainability, isn't that about ramping up domestic production, storage facilities? Doesn't power play the biggest role here? What do you think?
Of course. I mean, what can you do without energy in today's world, especially when you're talking about agriculture? Agriculture is capital intensive and it is energy intensive. So if you have to do the right agriculture, you have to talk about irrigation. So irrigation is, of course, is energy intensive. But again, we are at the point when it comes to technology where we have, many different technology, vintages of technology that we can explore. So we may not rely just on one source. So it's just having a mix, whether it's solar or renewables, as against the traditional old, technology of power production. So again, that is still the big elephant in the room, that we have not managed to really achieve the milestone that we had intended when it comes to power. I know that we have this agreement with CMENT. I don't know how far it's gone, but as it is right now. But you can also notice that to some extent, power seems to be stabilizing in some part of the country. So part of the challenges, I think, are maybe internal in the sense that they are localized within certain schools and all of that. But of course, that does not ignore the persistent challenges that we have with transmission. Generation, even right now, isn't that much of a problem, because we are not even able to evacuate all the power that's produced by the GENCOs. So the biggest problem still remains with the transmission network, and that is where I think the incoming administration will need to concentrate by finding the right technology, the right management, yes, competency, to deal with that. Because once that is done, then the next thing, because when we talk about agriculture, the type of agriculture we have is still also very rudimentary to a very large extent. So agricultural sector needs to be modernized, continually modernized. Over the years, we've seen the effort by the central bank, to incentivize investment in the agricultural value chain. We do not have the report, the evaluation of what has happened to know whether we've really achieved any of the targets that they set for themselves. But so I think that because we just don't have to continue to dwell in the past. It's about us looking at what the next administration is going to bring to the table. So for me, we need to reevaluate our achievement in agriculture, set new targets, new benchmarks, and then begin to look at how we enhance our various value chains within the agricultural sector. And then at that point, we now begin to see, clearly the role that energy will play in the modern agricultural sector that we will, develop for the country. So that is where, when we talk about energy for food production, of course, that is important. So the two have to go together. The modernization of the agricultural sector, the transformation of that, real transformation. I remember we talked about agricultural transformation agenda program or whatever of the Jonathan administration, which seemed to have taken a backseat during these 8 years of Buhari administration because central bank now started to intervene, using different mechanisms. So supposing that we return that, and then continue to go the build traction on the revamping the transmission network, which is for me is the most critical thing now, before even we start to talk about expansion, So, but again, all of these are market problems. Once you create the right mechanism, the market mechanism that can drive all this, I think investment will begin to come. And not just investment coming in, we now begin to attract the right foreign capital into the system, because that's what has been missing in the past 8 years. So we need to create that's like a one-out cliche, but we need to create enabling conditions, enabling environment that will continue to attract foreign capital into both the energy sector and the agricultural sector.
Professor, only got about 30 seconds to go. I want to get should the transmission company of Nigeria be privatized? Very briefly, please.
Of course, yes, it should be. We've tried other methods. We've tried, a management contract with Manitoba. I don't know what happened. It didn't really work out. So, but, the transmission line has a strategic significance for the country. So it's not something that you would immediately recommend to the government to privatize, because we are talking about national strategic priority here. So they may not be willing to do that. But then I think there are models already in place on how we can make those things work. They're all over the place. I was involved in drafting some of the manifestos of the previous, the contestants. I know that there are some very lofty initiatives regarding that can be pulled out, so plug and play sort of thing. So it's not really complex. So maybe not about full privatization of the transmission network, but I think we have to find the right mix of management contract that could give us, what we want in that particular segment of the energy sector.
Great conversation. Professor Bongo Adi, Professor of Economics, Lagos Business School, thank you so much for a great conversation on food prices and everything else in Nigeria's economy. Appreciate your time.